Today Dean and I have Matteo here, and Matteo is a former classmate of ours uh, in some of Alex's classes. And Matteo, just to get us started, why don't you let us know kind of what you did before your previous job, and then tell us what you're kind of doing now, just to kind of lead us through.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Matteo Muro, one of the hosts of our wonderful podcast. And I've been teaching since 2011 in Brandon, Manitoba. And I started teaching math. And I think 2 or 3 years into my career, I was like, wouldn't it be great if I taught less math? So I started teaching computer science. And I did that and sort of built up our program. We didn't really have one at the school. It's just a hobby of mine. And at some point during the computer science thing, I started getting my grade 12 class to go out and teach Scratch to elementary school students. So they'd learn Scratch, they develop lessons. And at some point, I sort of morphed into this project where I had like so many teachers interested that I couldn't keep up with everybody. But they went out, they taught Scratch, and we eventually turned it into sort of like an ongoing thing in the division, and we started collecting data. We can talk about that later if you want, but just last year, or I guess in September rather, I switched roles, and I'm the education technologist specialist or something. I have some title that I can never remember. So I just started that in September. So that's what I'm doing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's what we
Absolutely.
always try to do here for sure.
Yeah.
So what did those kids that did Scratch, what did you find their experience? And did they take to it? Did they like sharing it? Did you notice a difference in thinking or anything like that?
Yeah, so like we're just putting an article out there, so we'll hear back on that. But there's a couple ways you can tackle that. So we interviewed the different groups. So we had the high school students that we interviewed, and then we also interviewed the actual elementary kids, and they were mostly grade 7, 8. And then we interviewed the teachers themselves, like the elementary school teachers. And so I'll start with like the high school kids. Like for them, we thought that developing the lessons and actually going out and teaching and sort of affronting all the issues that come about when you start teaching a bunch of kids. Like their interviews are sort of like we asked them, like, do you feel more comfortable now with computer science topics, like the basic topics? And the general feedback from there was like that they didn't necessarily feel like they were more knowledgeable, but they always reported that they had sort of a better appreciation for how hard computer science is. Because by the time they get to grade 12, like they're sort of like, they get computer science, and they kind of forget how hard it is when you first start. And that's probably the biggest thing about computer science. Like getting into it is hard. Teaching it is hard. At least in Manitoba, kids don't have a lot to fall back on. Like they don't have any previous knowledge or anything that you can scaffold with. So when you start doing computer science, everything is brand new. So computational thinking skills are new. Making an algorithm is like surprisingly like a thing that they have no idea how to do. Breaking down a problem into tiny little chunks. Sometimes that's called pseudocode, or that's just general algorithm building. Like kids don't do that, and you'd think they'd get that in math class, but they don't. But it's one of the foundational computational thinking skills, I suppose. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So yeah, that's awesome.
That went on. Like I could talk about the elementary school kids, like what they said.
Well, did it seem like an add-on, or did it seem like something like more like, why aren't we integrating this more into all of our classes to try to problem solve and that, rather than just, oh, we did coding for a day and let's move on, or I can only take coding if I take computer science.
Yeah, it's surprisingly hard to teach like how to solve a problem. And I think the assumption is always that, oh, we just get this in math class and we just kind of absorb it. But I know the high school kids, like, they would go out, they would do 6 sessions. So this would happen over the space of like a month and a half or 2 months. And they would go out roughly once a week, every week and a half, and they go teach an hour. And then they would come back and they debrief, and they'd be like, okay, so what are the kids having trouble with? How do we need to change your planning? Like what worked, what didn't work? So they went through sort of a problem solving process that way. And they all appreciated that. And the elementary school kids themselves, like they all sort of reported saying like, okay, so Scratch is hard, but it's fun. Like we like doing it. We're not sure why we like doing it. And they all just said that they all leaned on each other as far as like solving problems. So if they didn't know the answer, they would either go to the internet, like do a Google search, they would talk to a high school kid, or they would just keep trying things until something worked. And then some of the kids were also saying that, like, you know, they didn't like it. So, you know, they would try a few things and then just whatever, mess around and Scratch and have some fun. But
Yeah, like I working with elementary kids in Scratch has to be it's a lot of fun, and I kind of also find like you have that core group who really excel, and what I like to see too is it's lots of those students who don't necessarily they're not necessarily good at the game of school in itself, right? And I like seeing it's a whole different way of thinking, like that you have to apply yourself to, and it's I don't know, I love it, and I tweeted this or I wrote about it, but I love teaching higher level math concepts, but being able to teach that through coding to like grade 4 students, and then they understand them, right? And it's just so rewarding to see the kids, like once they solve something, and how pumped up they get, because yeah, like you said, like it's hard and you have to break down absolutely everything. And
probably one of the most gratifying things was the high school kids being just coming back and being like, wow, teaching is hard. But yeah, you get like the teachers kind of said like, you know, there was the really gung-ho kids who were just loved it, and they were really good at helping other kids in the class. So that was really cool to see. Just sort of like, you know, elementary kids helping other elementary kids, and then the high school kids helping, and just everybody. It was amazing because everybody would get along and everybody was having fun. And you'd see light bulbs going off, and the teachers kind of said that there was always groups of students who would continue learning like after we left. So they would like just at like they were like any moment they had at lunchtime, at whatever, they'd have like you know, genius hour once a week or something. They would choose Scratch and they would just mess around and make projects. So that's one good thing that definitely came of it. But like the connections to computational thinking and how it all affected the kids kind of moving forward, like the main feedback was, you know, kids would say, I definitely know, like they all were appreciative of learning Scratch. So I think it's something we should teach. Also, a lot of the kids were saying that they now know for certain that they do not like coding and that it's not the career for them, which I think is valuable, like in and of itself. Like school should expose you to things so you can decide like, yeah, like this is something I want to pursue, or this is something that maybe is not for me. And then other kids were just like, I already knew I liked this, and this just confirmed it even more. And then there was the kids who were like, this was fun, it was really cool, I'm happy, but I don't see it as being particularly useful. It was kind of the basic feedbacks we got from the kids.
It's interesting, a lot of things you said, and I think Curtis and I were talking about this the other day with Melinda, another member of our groups, that we always say that we're teaching 21st century skills, but maybe we just don't say 21st century skills anymore. We're just teaching them important skills like collaborating and being creative and critical thinkers.
Collaboration was off the charts.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And that's a skill you're going to need now and in the future, you know, for sure.
Yeah, and especially like I know we were talking about different learning theories, right? And the whole social constructive or constructionism.
Constructionism, yeah.
Right.
Versus constructivism.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking. But like just this collaboration within that learning theory, that it's just so important, and just letting those kids explore and make learning on their own. And I think coding really allows for that to happen.
Yeah, that's definitely what I pushed with the kids, is like, we're all in this together. Everybody can like has a role, like whatever it is. There's no role that's big or small, like everything's valuable. Because I had some high school kids that really did not want to teach. Like they were like, I'm happy to answer questions and float around, but I do not want to be the lead at, like at the front of the room or, but yeah, everybody worked well together, and you definitely saw those collaboration skills. It's amazing. Like the kids just, for that stuff, they picked up on it really fast. Like, yeah, and those skills are important. So, you know what, there's a lot of soft skills that really like came to the front, and I think really came out like during the whole teaching process.
Mm-hmm. No, that is awesome. Anything else kind of on this topic, Dean, that you can kind of think of? I know, like, I want to ask Matteo a little bit about his robotics program that he ran last year. But before we get to that.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, Matteo, do you notice that it seems like, say, for example, in math, you know, if a kid gets a question wrong, they kind of stop and they don't really analyze it and figure it out. But it seems to me when kids are coding, they're okay with making their mistakes, and they're okay. And then they try to, well, that's just one way it didn't work. And they seem to have more of a growth mindset. Did you notice that too?
Yeah, I like that word, growth mindset. Like if you're going to be a successful coder, that's a skill that you have to learn. Like you're going to fail like 100 times before you get the program to work. And there's always the biggest stumbling block, like whether it was the elementary school kids or the high school kids, is like they need to get used to that feeling of like, okay, this didn't work, so what do I try next?
Build that resilience.
Yeah, that resilience, and that's really lacking like in math class, I think, because math class is so much of like, you know, there's one correct answer and there's usually one or two ways to get there. But with coding, like the nice thing about teaching coding is like there legitimately are so many different ways to tackle a problem. And that's part of the overload, like, and the challenge is like, I see kids sitting there and they're like, I'm like, I need, like, there's 1,000 ways I can do this and I can't just pick one. And I usually just say, well, try one. Like, that's the thing, is you got to pick one that seems promising and then, you know, document it, because if it didn't work, then you still need to keep that and be like, okay, so what's the next thing I'm going to try? Right. Or like, do I need to debug this? Like, you know, is this salvageable? So, and that process, like in grade 10, because that's when we started teaching them coding at my old school, that would take like a solid month or two before it would even start to begin to be natural for them, where they're just like, yep, like I'm going to try something and then I'm going to try something else. Yeah.
No, that's where I see the strength in coding in a classroom is that. So I'm glad that I love how you expressed that. That was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not for everybody. It really isn't. But like, I think it's something that we should expose them to. Like, we didn't have a single kid who said that they absolutely hated it. Like, everybody was very appreciative of the fact that they had a chance to learn coding in a more structured way, and that it was collaborative. And like, they all came away with something, and they all came away with a better understanding and an appreciation of like all the technology we have around us, like runs on code. Like, that was something that came up frequently in the discussion.
Be a producer, not a consumer, if you can.
Yes. Yeah, totally different mindset. Like, we should totally be showing, just having, I don't think we need to base everything around coding, but it should be somewhere in the curriculum, like some piece.
Was that, what did they make? What was their objective, to make a game or something? Or did you give them a real life problem to solve?
Oftentimes, like, I'd leave it up to the high school kids. I give them suggestions, but oftentimes, and it went through several iterations, but oftentimes it was to give them the skills to make a game.
Like catching poop, Curtis?
Yes.
The poopy diapers? That's
the pooping baby, which that's Brian Aspinall's breakthrough game with his students, was the pooping baby. Yeah.
Sounds like a game that all the students I ever had would love.
Yeah.
Including
you need that motivation, that hook, right?
Yeah, it's so easy to make coding fun. Like, it's just like the sky, like it's limitless. Yeah. Like, there's so many things you can do.
But I would like to see coding down the road, like where kids like, hey, how do we, maybe with the coronavirus, like make an app, you know, or something, or code something that would help people know where not to be or how to be safe, or something like that, like a real world problem. Like, you can even use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and could you code something to purify the water or something like that? You know, it'd be interesting to see kids dive into that, but maybe they need to start the game first.
Yeah, I like the idea of like real world problems though, because a lot of real world problems are solvable with, well, definitely, like, you can help them with code. Like I got a former student he's starting his PhD and he's doing everything with artificial intelligence. And I had him guest speak in my class last year, and he's doing stuff with artificial intelligence and homeless populations and stuff like that. Like it's so crazy, like what you can do with code.
It could be a game changer.
Yeah,
Definitely.
that was awesome. That was very cool. So what I'm kind of curious about, like I know that we talked about a little bit about your coding experience. I know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like you had a robotics program and it was an extra care program. Is that what that was, or was that part of your curriculum?
No, it's just it was a club. First Robotics Canada has a great program where you can. It's expensive, and that was a major stumbling block for us. But they have some grants and things you can get, so you can sort of get your first year mostly covered. But I think we had about $5,000 or $6,000 that we had, and you basically they give you a challenge and you build a robot, and it's a whole ordeal. It got canceled, unfortunately, because of COVID. So we were like a month out, and we were making some real traction on a robot. Like we just got it to move, and we had everything we needed to build the robot that we were going to build to like address the challenge they had. And it's like a Star Wars themed challenge. Like they had like the actual actors of Star Wars like make a video that was all like related to like this challenge they had. So the kids were just pumped about that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it all died, but there was a lot of math, engineering, and coding involved. Like I had some of my computer science kids get the robot to move because that all involved code. And like the kids were pumped, and the entire time, nobody had any idea what we were doing. But first gives you mentors. So they give you other teachers that have been doing it for 10, 15 years. And basically they're always there. You can ask all the questions you want. They'll help you out. It's a great program.
Well, that's awesome. So I think lots of times too, right, as teachers, I even think back to before I took my tech position, I was so intimidated by coding. Like I never coded with my own kids in my class. And it was until I took kind of the position that I'm in now is like I go in and we do an intro, an hour of code, and like teachers just or the students they just like I'm there to facilitate. They do it by themselves, right? And it's some days I wonder it's just like you guys can do this like on your own. Like just let the kids explore, kind of release the reins and that sort of thing. So what I'm wondering for you, Matteo, is did you kind of feel maybe not so much intimidated, but did you feel like you had to
know everything?
Yeah, exactly. Did you feel like you had to know everything kind of going into that program?
Like the robotics program?
Yeah.
No, I'm very well. My entire life is me bumbling through it without knowing anything really. So
I second that for me.
So I tell the kids that. So the whole robotics thing, like I just wanted to provide an opportunity for these kids to be, like for the geeky kids to be rock stars, because that's literally like the first robotics. Like everything about them is. There's lasers and everything's really high tech and cool. And the founding guy is the Segway guy. Like, the original guy who made the Segway, he's the guy who made first robotics. And he kind of said, he's like, what if like all the geeky kids had like a really cool outlet like sports teams do to be themselves and to show like, I don't know, like what they can offer to the world at large and be celebrated for that. And that's where the whole thing started. So it's definitely a growth mindset, and they really do set you up for success. So I was not like, after talking to the mentor, I was not nervous about starting that program despite knowing nothing about robotics.
That is awesome. And like, I know that like our
What a great role model that is, though. Sorry.
Yeah, like
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's something that I would really like to kind of look into too. Is I was going to partner up with it was an elementary school, like in their middle years, they wanted to kind of get some robotics programs started. And I know in Saskatchewan, they have like a robotics competition that you can enter, and, it's the challenge, right? And you, like you kind of have to code on the fly, or you have, they have a couple different challenges. And I think that would be like it's such a cool way to motivate those students and to give those students the opportunity that lots of students, they don't get to have those opportunities because they're not athletic or like those sorts of things. So it really gives them that time to shine.
And a lot of schools don't have those programs on their own, right? Like they are expensive, and
Yeah. Sure.
it's kind of crazy to me, like with the whole push and like we need more people in the STEM fields, and yet like at least in high school, but that's my experiences, we don't really offer them. Like there's so many cool and interesting things, we don't really offer anything to like get those kids like like the whole thing is exposure. Like that's the one thing that the scratch coding thing taught me, is these kids just need a little bit of exposure to decide if it's a thing for them to pursue later. And if they don't get it, they're going to stay, a lot of them will stick to the safe route. Like they're going to be like, well, I don't know what coding is, so I'm definitely not going to try that in university when I have to pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to jump on that too then. So Matteo, what have you found with girls in coding? Sometimes it's a male dominated kind of area. What has been your experience with I know we need more female coders out there.
Yeah, that was a whole interesting thing. It wasn't like it was something that sort of developed like as we were looking at the data. Like it wasn't something we set out to figure out, but like the girls engaged with it just as much or more than the boys did. Generally, like the teacher sort of said that whenever students did continue coding, it was usually the boys. But like this went through, like I think we had 4 or 5 different groups, like semesters that we did. And there was one particular group where the people who kept coding afterwards were all girls. And the teacher was like, they use coding like in other subjects. So like if they have a project, they made a game like in their English class, like to display their knowledge of whatever English curricular outcomes they were tackling. Like they use coding. So it's not like girls are definitely just as interested in coding. Just they seem to fall off easier. They, like if anybody, I don't know, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this, like, because we only have very limited data. Like they're just as interested in coding. That was clear.
They just need that encouragement and that kind of thing. Hey, it's just not for guys kind of a thing.
Yeah, guys seemed more likely, like whenever, because we'd ask them, like one of the questions was, do you have any previous experience? And guys, like the boys generally had more experience. There was very few girls who looked into it independently. That was definitely something that came out.
Yeah, hopefully you're changing that game as well with the work you're doing.
Yeah, it's all about exposure. Like that's probably the number one thing I pulled out of it. One of the things was they don't have any exposure, and they're very appreciative when they get the exposure. But they're not, like, girls aren't necessarily going to seek it out, and a lot of guys don't necessarily seek it out either.
I think what I would really like to see, and I think this might help too. It's we need to find role models for girls, right? And role models who are female for girls. And so, especially in fields of STEM, right? And I know one program that we were kind of piloting in our school division. It was called Girls Who Game. And Girls Who Game is, it's done by Microsoft actually. And we brought in kind of the main Microsoft lady, and they partner with some of our smaller schools who more typically have like they're less socially economic, more disadvantaged, I would say. And so almost like kind of like our community schools, right? And they partnered with those schools, created this after school program with girls, and it was all Minecraft based. And it was led by a female teacher with
Minecraft.
Yeah. It was Minecraft, and it was led by a female teacher and with just a group of girls. And they had challenges that they had to complete, and they would connect with each other on Flipgrid. They would connect with each other on Teams. They were given devices to take home and build, and it was awesome. It was just a way to get girls more involved in not only gaming, but just, the type of thinking and building that Minecraft provides. So it's super cool.
That does sound like a good experience. I know like in we would maybe have like 1 out of 8 or 9 of the high school kids would be a girl when we went out and taught, but all the elementary school kids said they felt really comfortable because their teachers were, you know, not too much older than them. So even though a lot of them were guys, like the girls that we interviewed were just like, we felt comfortable asking them questions because they were, you know, like high school kids versus like an older teacher, I think was sort of one of
They
the
could be
things that,
vibing together.
yeah. So definitely like role models are a great way to motivate these kids and to show them the possibilities. Like they need to see that there's real people like doing these things and that there are options, like just making them aware and connecting them with interesting and engaging mentors is definitely something that is valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that is awesome. Thank you so much, Matteo, for having a quick chat with us on your coding experience and your robotics experience. It's going to be super useful for us in our conversations that we're having with our class. So yes,
You betcha. I'm
I
so
picked
glad
up a lot. Yeah,
that I
it's a
can be
great
involved.
share, great conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy. I was sad that I couldn't take the course like that you guys are in.